6 months after I turned 19 inches, 2012, I went to my first music festival, a massive event out in the Mojave Desert. On a freezing Sunday night, my friend Jason invited me to stay for the final set, even though I was exhausted. I knew I wouldn't have the energy to hike back to our campsite afterward, so we planned to meet at the shuttle stop with Jason's sister, Emily. We were out in the middle of nowhere in California, meaning zero cell service, meaning when you got separated, it was a huge deal and everyone would panic. We were camped about 3 to 5 miles away from the main stages. I knew the general direction as I had walked it that morning, but it looked different at night. The whole walk back was along this 2-lane service road through the scrub brush, and our campsite was actually off this road further down. At certain points on this road, there were a few security tents, and then it would just go back to being a long, pitch-black stretch of sand again. The festival was loud, like a lot of these events are, but the walk was silent since most people were still at the stages. I'll skip most of the concert up until the point that Emily, who was holding my car keys, got lost in the crowd. Jason said it was fine and that we'd find her at the exit. Well, fast forward another few hours, and another few dead batteries, and I was freezing. I checked someone else's phone and it was like 3 in the morning. I figured it was time to move. I started looking for Jason, but I couldn't find him anywhere. In fact, it seemed like the shuttle line was miles long. I could barely even stand up, but I was still furious at the fact that Jason might have gone back to the tent without me. I asked a security guard for help, but he was useless. After 2 tries to find a ride, I gave up and realized I shouldn't just stand there freezing. So, literally not knowing what else to do, I dizzily stepped out onto the service road and began walking back toward the camping grounds. I knew this walk would take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour in my condition. Maybe after 20 minutes of walking down the sand, the slight shine of yellow headlights on the road was fading in from behind me. Jumping for joy inside, I lifted up my arm and stuck out my thumb. As the car neared, it slowed down and came to a stop right next to me. The man driving the beat-up Honda Civic rolled down the window and asked, "You looking for the campground?" I told him my tent was just down the road and beyond the second checkpoint, probably shivering beyond comprehension. He chuckled and told me to hop in. I thanked him and joyously hopped into the passenger seat. I was exhausted, and I remember completely disregarding the trash piling up in the back seat because I was so close to just passing out, and that's what happened. The memories of being in that car turned to a fog as I'm sure I dozed off. The next thing I remember, I woke up, still in the moving car. The guy looked at me and smirked, but didn't say anything. I looked around and realized the road we were on wasn't paved anymore. It was dirt. I nervously asked, "Where are we going?" He then said, "You really shouldn't be out here alone, you know." As the man answered my very straightforward question with a threat, the sobering reality of the situation hit me. You can let me out here," I told the man. The man responded with a firm, "Not yet." I felt like screaming as he said that. No, I really actually felt like I was going to scream. I started to panic as I felt more and more trapped by the second. The man took his eyes off the dirt path to look at me, and that's when I thought of the desperate move. I lunged in his direction as I screamed, and I grabbed the steering wheel and yanked it hard to the right. Thankfully, we were going slow enough because we swerved off the path and slammed right into a large Joshua tree. The man yelled in pain as his head hit the window, and the car stalled. That's when I took it upon myself to scramble out the door and run for my life into the desert darkness and duck behind a large rock formation. The man came stumbling out of the car with a tire iron, and on 2 separate occasions, he walked right past my hiding spot, cursing under his breath. Eventually, I heard his footsteps crunch back toward the car. That was when I ran in the opposite direction toward where I thought the highway was. Unfortunately, he heard me running. By some miracle, I saw the flashing lights of a patrol car patrolling the perimeter fence, and I ran toward the fence, waving my arms like a lunatic. The patrol car stopped, and I climbed the fence before they could even ask what I was doing. They forced me to sit down, and I yelled at them that there was a guy with a tire iron out there. Once I told them that I was kidnapped by the man driving that Honda, the officers called for backup and went to investigate. They found the car crashed against the tree, but the driver had fled into the night on foot. I made it back to the campsite safely, where I couldn't thank the officers enough. I immediately woke up Jason and told him. The police wanted to know if I saw his face clearly, and then I felt like punching myself in the face. I failed to get any good description in the dark that would have allowed me to actually identify him in a lineup. All I knew was that he drove a rusted silver Honda. I made sure to give Jason a piece of my mind, and part of me always held a grudge against him ever since, just for losing track of me at the stage. I haven't seen him in 5 years now, however. And this was actually the first time I even thought about this incident for almost a decade now. As time goes on, even the worst of memories may start to fade, but after writing this to share, it's once again fresh in my mind. I've learned one thing from my one and only experience, stopping for a stranded motorist. Don't stop for a stranded motorist. It was a Sunday night, probably around 2 in the morning. I was driving down Highway 9 Inches, Colorado, a route I commonly took to get back from the ski lodge. It was a steep stretch of nothing but snow-covered pines on either side, with the occasional cliff drop-off. I was on my way back home from work, and as usual at this time of night around our isolated mountain town, there was not a single other car on the pass. I turned on the LED light bar on my pickup truck to have optimal vision on the unlit switchbacks, which allowed me to spot somebody far down the road just waving at the shoulder. As I got closer, I saw her raise both arms up and frantically wave them. She was trying to flag me down. My heart started racing. I had no idea if I should stop or not. I slowed down just to get a better look at the girl. First of all, she seemed like a younger woman, maybe 25. She had on a thin red cocktail dress with no coat and high heels, standing in the freezing snow. The time to make a decision was immediate, and with a lack of my better judgment in the heat of the moment, I came to a stop, rolled down the window, and asked, "Where's your car, miss?" "Just up the bend," she said in a shaky, high-pitched tone. "Hop in." I called out the window. She opened the door to my truck and stepped inside slowly. Heavy-duty trucks have very stiff hinges on the doors, so when she tried to close the door the first time, it didn't latch. I politely said, "Oh, the door didn't catch. Just pull it open and slam it shut real hard. These doors are heavy." The body language she was giving off in response was unsettling. About 3 seconds after I had finished my sentence, she looked at me, then turned her head slowly to the left, and again waited 3 or 4 more seconds before finally opening the door and then slamming it back shut. By the way, this girl was moving. I already regretted my decision to let her in. I put my foot on the gas, and we started moving along the pass. The speed limit on this road was 45, but I was going 60 just to get the girl to her vehicle quicker. "So, how long have you been out in the cold?" There was an awkward gap of silence before she replied with, "Just a few hours." I wanted to turn the heater up to kill this awkward and downright creepy silence, but something in my head told me not to move my hands for whatever reason. Suddenly, I could see just through the corner of my eye that the woman had turned her head and was staring in my direction. At this point, I was telling myself that I needed to get this girl out of my truck. For a good mile, I felt her gaze just hitting me like a brick, and all the while, I tried my best not to look back. Finally, she turned her head the other way and said, "You know, trucks like this are worth a lot of money in parts." I looked at her in confusion. She dug her hand into her purse and said, "I've been waiting with this pistol for the past few hours, wondering when the right mark would come." She pulled out a snub-nosed revolver from her purse, and at that instant, I felt like my stomach had dropped out of my body. I told her to put the gun away immediately. She told me in a calm, emotionless voice, "Pull over, next to that overlook." I did what she said, coming to a stop next to a scenic view railing. What followed still haunts me. She began to cock the hammer back next to a pile of what looked like other wallets and phones from previous assumed victims, and let out a disturbing laugh. I managed to choke out the words, "You can just take the truck, lady." She looked at me again and said, "Get out of the car. I want you to look at something." I told her no, and she raised her gun up closer to me as an obvious threat. "Just get out for a second. There's something I want you to see over the edge of that cliff." I knew my life was on the line, and I had to be smart. I said, "Yeah, okay, let's go." I opened the door to my truck, making a point of leaving it open, raised my hands in the air, and backed away slowly from the door. She too left the car and started walking around the front to my side to escort me to the edge. At the exact moment that she was directly in front of the headlights, blinded by the beam, I jumped back in, threw it into drive, and floored it, swerving around her. Never looking back, I got back home within 20 minutes, still breathing heavily and wanting to throw up. This was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, and I urge everybody and anybody that if you by some chance see a stranded motorist on a mountain pass at some odd hours of the night, do not take any course of action other than speeding right past them. So this was told to me by my older cousin Leo numerous times as a teenager growing up, as one of those cautionary tales to keep in mind through the years, and to his credit, I've never forgotten it. Whenever anything associated with stranded motorists comes up, it always springs to mind and probably always will. Even makes me a bit cold whenever I think about it, actually. So Leo, who was driving big rigs at the same time as my dad, so this was about the late 90 seconds. I believe he was a burly man in his mid-30 seconds. He's one of those real tough exterior souls, always willing to pull over in a storm, you know? And I can't imagine him being anything other than that when he was younger, so I totally see him doing this too. So, driving through the mountain pass, which was about a 4-hour haul from the depot, he saw a man shivering near a snowbank on the side of the road. As he neared, the guy turned in, a typical desperate manner, waving his arms and shouting. Leo, bless his soul, pulled the air brakes and asked him if he needed any warmth. He told me the guy was really grateful, if not a bit twitchy, when he asked for a ride to the nearest gas station. Leo gave a nod and popped open the passenger door for the guy, who then tossed his gear into the footwell and climbed up for the ride ahead. They talked heavily for most of the trip, about jobs, the weather, etc., serious road talk. He felt that they were connecting very well, and even shared his thermos of hot coffee and a sandwich a little over halfway there. He says the guy seemed really silent and intense when he offered the food. But one of the things they talked about was family, and how Leo was working double shifts for his sick daughter, which was why he was driving in the blizzard in the first place. But the guy eventually drank the coffee, and they went on their way. As soon as they got to the service station, the guy thanked him profusely for the heat and the meal, and asked to be let out near the payphones. Before getting out, he asked for Leo's mailing address so he could send him cash one day and maybe repay him. Thrilled at the prospect of knowing his passenger was safe, Leo wrote it down on a napkin for him and drove off with a warm feeling of having saved a life. Now, I'm sorry if you were expecting something supernatural to have happened by now, but I think this is what freaked me out so much as a kid. How normal everything seemed to have worked out. Leo gets this pale look in his face and a shaky tone in his voice when he tells me this next part. How a month later, he got a letter from the county jail from the same man he had picked up. The letter didn't waste time with hellos and told him that he should thank God that he was such a family man, because when he first got in the truck, he was planning on stabbing Leo and dumping him in the snow. That he was going to hijack that rig to crash through the blockade further down the road and make his escape. But after Leo talked about his daughter so lovingly and even showed him her picture taped to the dash, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't think that he could live with himself making a little girl an orphan. The man's final words in the letter were, "Please, Leo, please, never ever stop for a stranded stranger." Then he signed the paper. Leo never got a letter from him again. He heard the guy got a life sentence. And so, I've learned one important thing from this story, that I'm going to take that felon's advice and never ever pick up a drifter